I'm really excited to introduce you tonight, for those of you that don't know, to Steve, who's coming on to have a conversation with me. We're going to be doing a little bit of a chat about Steve's books, his inspiration, his writing journey, and then at the end there will be a chance for you to ask any questions that you want, and also to get Steve to sign some books. Woo!
I'm loving the enthusiasm.
Yes, this is perfect. This is amazing. And thank you so much to Sobo Sommelier and the team for hosting us here. This is just the most fantastic venue, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, we are going to start by... What happened to my pages? This is good. I put them in the wrong order. We're going to wing it.
This could be interesting.
So Steve, I'm going to pass the mic to you,
Okay.
if you need it, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about your two books.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex said, my name is Steve Couch. I am the author of two books so far, Dead Man Singing and Foul and Fair, which I think you'll be asking me about in more detail. I have a third book which is finished and is currently out on submission, so hopefully we'll have exciting news about that at some point. But at the moment I'm just waiting for an agent to come back and say, yes, you are a literary genius, which strangely they haven't so far.
It takes time. They have to have time to recognise the genius. Okay, so now I'm going to start off by asking you a little bit about your background. So you had a career before becoming a published author. You still work now. How do you juggle all of this and find time to write these books?
My career has more been a succession of working out what the next step was and then taking it and seeing where that went. I did an English degree, and at the end of my degree I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I ended up taking a job as a church youth worker that I thought I'd do for a couple of years while I work out what I wanted to do. And I then spent the next 9 years as a youth worker. Then when I decided I didn't want to do youth work anymore, I started working for an educational charity as a writer and editor, writing mainly online resources, subscription websites, that kind of thing. We had a website called RE Lessons Online, the idea of which was I would write RE lessons that took clips from the latest films, and the teacher shows the clip in the classroom and then draw out the themes from the clip and relate that to the RE syllabus. So basically, I was being paid for watching films and then turning them into RE lessons, which was quite nice. I enjoyed that. There was a period of years where absolutely every film that came out that I was remotely interested in, I got to see and get paid for seeing. So, win. Sadly, the small educational charity that I was working for, as small educational charities tend to do, went bust. And I started writing and editing freelance and not getting a lot of work. And more recently, one of my hobbies, which relates to one of the books, was coaching kids football, and I decided to monetize that. So I now work going into primary schools, doing lunchtime clubs and after school clubs as a football coach. And that's great because that gives lots of time around that I can work the writing in. So I've gradually worked it back to the actual question of how I fitted it. So I do a few lunchtimes and a few after schools each week, and there's lots of space for writing in between that.
So let's dive into your books then. Can you tell us about Dead Man Singing? Dead Man Singing. This is not good to get the book title wrong.
That's easy for you to say.
It's not. Without spoilers, because I am reading it at the moment, so don't spoil it for me. And can you give us a quick synopsis and tell us what inspired it?
Okay, the synopsis, really simple. It's about a has-been rock star who fakes his death to get his record selling, and then goes out on the road as his own tribute act.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Great premise. It's brilliant.
And the idea came to me. I'm a huge fan of a musician called Richard Thompson, who those of you who know the world of folk rock of the 70s will know exactly who he is. Those of you who don't, he's well worth checking out. But I'm a big fan of his, and I went to see him in concert years and years and years ago, and he did a song called Now That I Am Dead, which is sung from the perspective of a rock star who has died and is moaning about the fact that it's only now he's dead that he's actually making any money. Sample lyrics: now that I'm dead, my agent finally said he wanted to have lunch with me, and so on. And from that song, it's quite a short leap to the idea of Dead Man Singing. I say it's a short leap that took me 30 years to make, but during, I think it would have been 2021, something like that, for some reason I remembered this song, and I suddenly thought, there's a story in that. And I did something that I very, very rarely do. I put aside the other story that I was working on, which wasn't really working, but I put it aside because I had to write Dead Man Singing, and I thought there was something about the idea that I couldn't leave alone. And the way you all reacted to hearing the basic premise, people often react like that, but I knew I couldn't just rely on that premise. There had to be the emotional backdrop to Dave, the main character, to Dave's life as well. So people will pick up the book and start it for that premise, but they'll stay if they're engaged with Dave and if they're invested in him. So I had to work quite hard on that side of it.
Well, I can safely say that I'm invested already.
Excellent.
Yeah. I can't wait to find out. I mean, yeah, so no spoilers. So Foul and Fair is your second book. How does that differ? And I know that you've, as a coach, this one's kind of come from a personal journey.
Yes, Foul and Fair is actually a book that I wrote before Dead Man Singing, which I sent it out and got rejected. And I'd worked out what was wrong with it. So while Dead Man Singing was going through the publication process, I set about trying to fix what was wrong with Foul and Fair. And it took me a while to work out how to fix what was wrong, but I'm really pleased with how it's come out. So in a sense, Foul and Fair, my second book, is actually my first book and my third book, and my first book is my second book, if that makes sense. But Foul and Fair is the story of an under-12s team football coach, like grassroots, regular kids who play football for a hobby, not future professionals, just ordinary kids playing football. And this under-12s coach gets into a feud with a rival coach, which escalates wildly out of all proportion. Kind of Roy of the Rovers meets House of Cards was what I was going for, with dirty tricks and lots of dodgy goings on. And at the heart of it, I managed a kids team. I managed my youngest son's team for 7 years. There are two types of adults who are involved in kids football. There's the people who are there because they want the kids to enjoy themselves and to enjoy playing football. And there's the people who are there because they want to win. And the kids are just pawns in their little empire of being a winner. And the clash of those two cultures is at the heart of Foul and Fair. But as with Dead Man Singing, it needs more than that. And I realised as I was writing it that there's a bigger question there about drawing the line between getting the right result and doing the right thing. And those questions, far beyond the football side of it, they run through the book. And I've tried to not just go for the obvious pat answers. I think there's a lot of blurring of lines. So the main character loses his moral compass a bit and then has to try and refine it again. So if you're not a football fan, I have friends who are not football fans who've read it and said they really enjoyed it. You don't have to be a football fan to enjoy it, in the same way that you don't have to be into the same music as me to enjoy Dead Man Singing. Not that I'm trying to sell you the books or anything.
Why not? So I'm really interested there. So it sounds like you've learned things from your characters as they've learned as well. And I just wondered, is that true from Dead Man Singing as well? And did you have a particular favourite out of the two of them when you were writing?
I think to some extent, with any writer, the book you're writing at the moment is the favourite. I think I'm always going to have a special place in my affections for Dead Man Singing, because I started writing fiction when my boys were small. My boys are now 21 and 18, and when they were little and I was reading bedtime stories to them, some of the stories we were reading just inspired me. I thought, this is so good, I'd love to try to write something like that. And other stories inspired me because I thought, this got published? Seriously? Surely I can do better than that. And it turns out it's not as easy as I thought. But I spent about 15 years writing fiction, first children's fiction, then adults, and submitting it to agents and being rejected, and writing something else and submitting it and being rejected, and writing and being rejected, and so on. And I saw it as a process of steadily failing better and learning my craft. But after 15 years of doing that, when I got the email from my publisher saying, yes, we want to publish Dead Man Singing, it literally felt like something being lifted off my shoulders. And there was a sense of, I've always wanted to write and I've never done it, and had I left it too late getting started, and had I failed to make the most of what potential I might have had, all of that vanished the day that I got that email. So because of that, I think Dead Man Singing will always have that extra emotional weight for me. Although clearly Foul and Fair is also an exceptionally good book.
Of course. No, I get that, because my first book, it always is going to have that special place, isn't it? Because that's the one that got you a deal. That's the one that made your dream come true.
Yes.
So, of course, that's going to be memorable. So, I always get asked this question, so I'm going to be cruel and ask somebody else. Are your characters based on any real people?
Mostly no. Kieran, who is the antagonist in Foul and Fair, is based on a number of real people, in that he is an amalgam of all the idiots who shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a kids' football team that I encountered, or which friends of mine told me about. The vast majority of the things he says and does really happened. Either I've witnessed someone saying what he says on the touchline, or another manager would say, oh, you'll not guess what that bloke from such and such club did. And yeah, the stories get around in kids' football. So he's based on a number of people, but not one. And I live in fear of someone coming up to me and saying, I've read your book, that's me, isn't it? And if they do, I think my answer is going to be, well, if you think that, go and have a look at yourself, mate, because he's not a flattering character. So if you think that's you, but then I'd run very quickly. Generally, I don't base my characters on people, and if I do, it's just the faintest germ of an idea, but you find the character soon takes on a life of their own, and gets completely different from the person that you started with. In which case, you're then really worried if they recognise themselves in that, but I've then got them doing that thing, it looks like I'm saying, I think you're the kind of person who would do that. And I'd prefer, no, most of my characters are just fiction, yeah. But Kieran is the big exception. There is also another character in Foul and Fair who is an annoying parent in the main character's team. And all football coaches will tell you parents are the worst part of running a kids' football team. he is an amalgam of a couple of parents who I had in my team. One of whom I know has bought the book, and I hope he hasn't recognised himself. I don't think he would. The other one might, but I don't think he would.
Maybe you will inspire them to change.
We can hope.
Was that an intention when you started these books? Because both of them kind of touch on moral issues. Was that planned or coincidental, and how did you research them?
One of the reasons that I didn't start writing books until I was nearly 40 was I'd always wanted to be a writer. I was that kid at school who was always writing. When the sixth form magazine came out, other people would have an article in it, and I had half the magazine just because I kept producing stuff and giving it to the editor. And I'd always wanted to write a novel, but for a long time I didn't know what I wanted to say. I knew that the books I liked were more than just a story. They were books that had a bit of weight to them, that had something to say. And I didn't know what it was that I was going to say. And one of the things that I learned through starting writing the children's stories is that doesn't matter. Just tell stories, and actually the meaning of the story and the themes will come out as you're writing. I think writers cannot help but put their worldview into what they're writing. It will come out, and if you focus on the story, you find the themes as you go. So Dead Man Singing, I started with that idea that I said about Happy Rockstar, Face of Death, could be bad. It ends up being a story about authenticity, about learning to face up to your responsibilities, about maturing, all sorts of those issues, which I found that as I was writing it. And then once you see that's where it's going, you lean into that and build on that. Similarly, I said already, Foul and Fair, the idea of the clash between doing the right thing or getting the right result. First of all, I was just trying to write a funny story about rivalries in kids' football, but you start to see where it's going and lean in on that. Yeah.
So do you plan, or are they always just evolving?
The more I've written, the more that I plan, but I don't think you can plan every last detail. A way that I often describe it is, I know where I'm going from A to Z, and I know that in getting from A to Z, the story is going to hit the letter E, the letter L, the letter R, and the letter Y on the way to Z. I don't necessarily know what all the letters in between those points are, but I've got the overarching plan. And the book that I've recently finished writing, I got lost, I got bogged down part way through writing that, and one of the problems was I didn't have enough of the structure when I started writing, so I had to backtrack and dig myself out of that. So I find that knowing where you're going really helps. That said, there's one of the main supporting characters in Dead Man Singing, who you've probably not met yet, was a complete, I hadn't planned her at all, and I was about 3-4 chapters in and thinking, right, what do I need to happen here? And I wrote a character that the main character bumps into somewhere, and I liked the chemistry between the two of them, and she then completely changed the emotional side of the story. I see Leslie smiling, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cindy, I found as I was writing, and she then, once she was in the story, completely changed the direction of the story and gave it the emotional weight that it needed, I think. So you need to make room for happy surprises like that, but I like to know where I'm going.
Yeah, I love it when the characters take you off on a detour that's like, I think I've had one of mine that suddenly gained a system. I'll just go back and put her in from the beginning. And it's fun, isn't it? That's
Yes.
what makes it that you as the author don't know where your book is going as much as the reader. That's fantastic. So I am curious, and we had a conversation a little bit about this the other day, about how you developed your skills as a writer. Did you take courses? Did you study? And tell us your journey.
I'm really tempted just to say no, I didn't. I've never been part of a writers group. I've never done any creative writing courses. I did an English degree, so I studied literature and studied great literature, which, you know, ain't nothing in terms of feeding you as a writer, but it's different. As I said, I've always written, and in all the jobs I've had in my working life, writing has been part of it. I would, when I was at university, I wrote drama sketches that we put on. When I was a church youth worker, I'd write sketches to be performed in church services or at the youth group. When I was working for the educational charity, I was writing. So on one level, on a technical level of manipulating words and putting them together to convey what you need them to, there was lots of that. In terms of writing fiction, when I started writing children's stories for my boys, first of all, picture books but without pictures, because that's not a gift I have. Then first chapter books and then longer children's stories. That's where I learned about sustaining a story and crafting a satisfying narrative arc, and about children's stories are great for learning the economy of phrasing, because you can't be waffly and wordy with a children's book because they're not that long. Yeah, and actually when I first started writing the book that would become Foul and Fair, it was such a liberation to be writing an adult story, because I had all this lovely big blank canvas to work with, but I had the skills that I'd learned from writing the children's stories, and all of those skills about economy of language and making every word count and building a character and whatever else, that all applies, but I felt I was able to do more, for me, more satisfying depth to a plot, because there was more room to stretch out.
No, that makes sense.
I'm not sure why I've never been part of a writing group. I think they can be hugely valuable, and I'm not saying whatever you do, don't. It's never appealed to me. I think possibly I've always been afraid of those kind of groups being dominated by an overbearing, over-dominant figure who possibly doesn't know what they're talking about, but won't let anybody else consider that might be the case. And I mean, when I was at school, I was bullied for several years, and I didn't want to put myself in that environment. And maybe I would have got to where I wanted to quicker if I had, or maybe I wouldn't. But I'm happy with where I've got to. So yeah.
And the experience you've had, the like working with the kids, seeing music, this is all built into your book.
Yes, I mean the Foul and Fair is about the manager of an under-12s football team. So there's a number of characters who are 11 and 12-year-old kids, and with youth work and with having my own children, I'm used to engaging with kids of that age. So yeah, I had a lot that I could draw on. Actually, going back to the question about characters based on real life, some of the boys in the football team in Foul and Fair have a passing similarity on the pitch to some of the boys who I coached in my football team, but I tried not to make the personalities too similar.
Yeah.
Partly because when I was writing it, they were still legally children. They're all legally adults now, and I just didn't feel it was appropriate to put them into a book. Yeah.
That makes sense. So we were talking about this the other day. How would you define your genre? We were kind of like opening this up a little bit to some of the people that have already read the book. Because
Yes.
your books are kind of, they have elements of crime, they're quite emotional.
I really struggle with the question of genre. I don't feel that they're crime books. I don't feel that they're psychological thrillers like Alex writes, but they have something of that in the main characters. There is a certain amount of introspection and there's soul searching. They're certainly fast paced, so my publisher describes them as thrillers, which I wasn't consciously writing thrillers, but I can see where that comes from. I think I'd call them contemporary fiction, but that just feels incredibly vague and non-committal. Those of you here who have read any of my books, if you're willing to be brave and expose yourself, would anyone like to say what genre you would see them as being? Because I struggle with this.
I think perhaps one way of looking at it is, what other author do you like or feel it's like?
That's a good point. Yes, I'd say that the best comparators for what I write would be people like Nick Hornby.
Yes.
I'm a huge Nick Hornby fan, and I think a lot of the themes and concerns of his books you'll find in mine. He's also, like me, a huge football fan and a huge music fan. So on a superficial level, there's a comparable. And actually, my author bio at the back of Dead Man Singing, I share the fact, and this is true, that I share a birthday with Nick Hornby, the Football League, and Paul McCartney's first solo album. All of those came into the world on the same day as me, although in different years, obviously. And actually, that's not a bad triangulation of my interests. I was quite pleased when I discovered the McCartney one. That completed the triangle. I had the other two for ages and knew I needed something else to make it really work. But yeah, so long answer to Patrick's question, Nick Hornby.
What about David Nichols?
Yes, David Nichols as well.
So now you're getting a genre.
Yes.
So maybe that's what about.
A friend of mine who heard me and Alex talking about it said that she thinks that what I write is women's fiction for men.
Well, I was just going to say, because Nick Hornby to me is chick lit for men. So
Fair enough. If it's good enough for Nick Hornby, I'll wear that one as well.
and David Nichols is romance, isn't it?
See, there's romance in my books, but I wouldn't call them romance
No,
books.
no.
But
Just saying
yes.
if you're likening it to
Yeah, one thing that both of those two do, which I like to do, is to have cultural references in the books. I think Dead Man Singing, there's lots of music in it. You don't have to know any of the music to enjoy the story. It works on its own terms. But if you do know the music, there's a whole added dimension to enjoy. And I know if I'm reading a Hornby book, or a David Nichols, or Chris Brookmeyer, who is another big favourite of mine, more of a crime thriller writer, and every now and again they'll mention a song. If it's a song that I know, I get that little thrill of, oh yeah, I know that one, and it draws me in, and that's something I consciously try and do. In Dead Man Singing, there's lots of music. The main character of Foul and Fair, as well as being a football coach, is an English teacher, so there are literary references, and you may have guessed from the title that Macbeth has more than the odd appearance in the book. I like to play about with popular culture and use that in my books, because I think, like most writers, I like to write the kind of stuff that I would like to read, and I like that in a book.
So is there something or things that you have learned from the experience of writing and getting published, and anything that you would advice you would give or give yourself if you could have done back then?
I think the best advice, I'll give you two pieces of advice for would-be writers. One is, as I've already said, just tell stories. Get started and just tell stories. Don't feel you have to wait till you know what you want to say, because you'll find that as you're going. Just jump in and tell stories. And your first ones, I mean, if you're very good and very lucky, your first ones might be a success for you. For most of us, they're not, but that learning curve is so valuable. The second one, my favourite bit of writing advice, and I'm going to paraphrase here. Ernest Hemingway said, "All first drafts are rubbish." He actually used a much earthier phrase than rubbish, but I'm assuming that there's at least some polite people here, so I'll go for the clean version. Always finish the first draft. I think too many writers get aware that what they're writing isn't perfect yet and give up. As I said with Dead Man Singing, it's very rare that I'll abandon something partway through in order to do something else, but I did in that case, so I broke my rule there. But always finish the first draft, because the first draft doesn't have to be good. The only job the first draft has is to exist and give you something to then build on and improve on. And for me, the most enjoyable part of writing a book comes after the first draft, when you're then drafting and redrafting and building it up and leaning into the themes and adding in a clue in chapter 3 that is essential to what you want to reveal in chapter 27, and all those little details, the layering up. That's the part that I really love, and that's the part that I find satisfying. So I've taken a diversion from the question, but always finish the first draft and just tell stories would be my two big takeaways.
Okay, well you stole my next question, which was what's your approach to editing, so...
I love it.
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling. I think there are two camps though, aren't there? Of you either love writing the first draft, or you loathe the first draft and you love the editing process. It's really interesting.
I think I love the first draft when it's going well.
Yes.
But Dead Man Singing, the first draft went really smoothly.
Yeah.
Foul and Fair was harder, and the book that I got on submission, Image and Imagine, was harder still. But even with Dead Man Singing, where the first draft came relatively quickly, the layering up was still more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? Your titles are already good. You just shared
Thank
the
you.
third, you just shared the third one, Image and Imagine, which is quite nice as well. Do they leave you alone? Do you put your titles on there, or do you publish change them?
So far, I've never had a title changed on me with my vast experience of 2 books. The Foul and Fair was originally called House of Red Cards, but when I rewrote it after Dead Man Singing, I decided Foul and Fair was a better title for it, and also played more into the themes of the book and to the Macbeth angle. With Dead Man Singing, I had the idea before I had the title, but I did have the title quite early on. I tried running a few different ideas, and Dead Man Singing was the one that I thought was best, and when I ran it by a few friends, they said, yeah, that works, that's good. Have I answered the question?
You have him.
Well, shall I shut up then?
I'll ask you another one. So, how did you get? So you're published with the Book Guild.
Yes.
So how did you approach them? What was your journey to get there?
With Dead Man Singing, I did what I had done with other books in the past, which was spent hours scouring the pages of the Writers and Artists Yearbook looking up all the agents, checking the websites, trying to work out which ones were interested in the kind of book that I've written, submitted to a load of agents, got rejected, went back to the manuscript, looked at it again, tweaked it a bit here, a bit there, sent it off to some more agents, got rejected, and so on. And then I thought, right, most major publishers won't take submissions if they don't come via an agent. So I started going through the Writers and Artists yearbook to find out which publishers would take unsolicited submissions. And I thought, if I'm not getting anywhere with an agent, I'll try publishers. And most of those who I say, then it's the same process of checking out which ones are a good fit for what I've written. And most of the ones I've submitted to either didn't hear back from or had a polite rejection. And then, as I say, the email from the Book Guild, to some extent, why did I pick them? Because they're the ones who said yes. But they've been brilliant to work with. They've been a pleasure to work with editorially. Although that's easy to say because I don't wanted to change very much. It was largely just copy editing. They basically said, yeah, we think this is good to go, so
I'm not jealous.
we'll do it. But I rather think that's partly their business model, is if they feel it needs more work, they don't take you on. I could be wrong on that, but I think.
Or you're
that's
just
it.
that good.
Or I'm just that good. I suppose it's possible. I would like to say, but no, I think it's their business model. But bless you for that, Alex.
You're welcome. So, I'm really curious, if Foul and Fair or Dead Man Cindy or both were developed into a film, who would you see starring in them?
That is a good question, and I know that Leslie has thoughts on this. Leslie would like to see Jason Momoa in the leading role, but that is because Leslie would like to see Jason Momoa in the leading role of any film at all in the world. Dead Man Singing, the part of Dave, when we meet him, is 40 years old. He's a jaded, has-been rock star whose career was big and has dipped. So I think we need someone who has a bit of magnetism, a bit of charisma, but also that sense of world weariness, of life having beaten them down. I've been through various people in my mind on this, because of course I've thought about this, authors do. My first thought was Cillian Murphy. This was before he won Oscars and things. I actually think he's possibly a little too old for the role now. But before he became an actor, he had a choice to make. He had an offer of a recording contract. So he could have been a rock star, and he chose to be an actor. And I think whoever plays Dave, I'd like to be someone who actually plays guitar, and just to add that authenticity to those scenes. My favourite for the role now would probably be Tom Burke, if you know the Strike series on BBC. I think he'd convey that the heaviness that Dave would have, the world weariness, and he's quite charismatic. I mean, he's a leading man, so you'd expect him. Without wanting to plot spoil, when we meet Dave, he has long hair, but as you know, Leslie, he does cut it. So for much of the book, no, he wouldn't. Sorry. And I hope that's not too much of a plot spoil.
We're okay.
I think it's very interesting. This is a classic author's dreaming. We all do it. What is a bit more granular and perhaps a little bit more poignant is that in that case, you thought about or started to look at the screenplay.
I haven't. I'm being slightly cynical. I'm not massively pushing at the doors of those doors yet. Partly because I think if the book takes off and becomes more successful, we're likely to get a better film out of it than if not. But I also know enough about writing to know I know novels as a reader, and I've learned the craft of writing a novel, I don't have that knowledge of screenplays. And I've always taken the view that if I wrote something that someone wanted to turn into a screenplay, I would be very careful on selling the rights to someone whose vision I trusted and who I felt got my vision for the story. But from that point, the film is their thing and the novel is my thing. I think the worst literary adaptations are the ones where the director treads too closely to the original, because what makes a great book isn't always what makes a great film. And what's important is having the same vision and telling that vision selling that vision correctly in the medium of cinema. So I don't think I'm the person to write the screenplay. Who knows, maybe at some point in the future I will change my mind on that, and you'll all get to come a point and go, but you said, but I don't think so. In terms of casting, Cindy, who we talk about in Dead Man Singing, she's 30 when we meet her, and she is someone who has been repeatedly kicked by life. She's someone who's been repeatedly knocked down by life and got herself up again and found hope again and been knocked down and keeps getting up. So you'd need someone with that vulnerability, with that strength and fragility, and who could convincingly play a 30-year-old. And my current leading choice for that would be Jodie Whittaker, who I think would be awesome for it. Someone, it might even be you, Leslie, someone once said to me they thought Sheridan Smith would be good. I don't want to sound ungallant, I don't know that she could play 30 now. Maybe she could. I think she would have been very good for the role, but in the same way that Cillian Murphy is possibly too old. I feel terribly unchivalrous saying that. But
there's a new woman, I don't know what her name is, but she's just been in Daddy Issues and White Lotus. And her main, I know it sounds stupid, her main key thing is...
I know who you mean. Yes, she is very good. I think she's too young for Cindy.
Too old, too young.
Yeah, hey, that's showbiz, you know. It's a tough world. With Fallon.
This is all just a huge fantasy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I'm on a roll now. With Foul and Fair. Not that I've spent ages thinking of all this. Oh, actually, she could be Imogen. In Imogen Imagine. That could work. Anyway, with Foul and Fair, I quite like the idea of a bit less Hollywood and more a Friday nights BBC or ITV Sunday night type drama. Great tunes. I'm quite tempted for the main character in Foul and Fair, Ralph Little, who is also a semi-professional footballer, or was, so there'd be an authenticity to football. And if you got him as the main character, then Will Mellor would be great as the antagonist, because the two of them have great chemistry, and I think Will Mellor would enjoy being an idiot. So yes, that's a very long answer to the who would I cast question. I could go way deeper into the characters in Dead Man Singing, and I've got ideas for lots of them, but I think leaving it as Dave and Cindy is probably best.
Wow, that was a lot more thought than I thought.
Self-obsessed much?
So afterwards, I'm going to come to you and ask you for the advice for mine. I have no idea. So before I open it up to questions from everybody else, can you just tell us a little bit about Imogen Imagine?
Yes.
And what's next?
Imogen Imagine is, I don't know whether to tell you how I got to it or to tell you the idea first. Okay, when I'd finished writing Dead Man Singing and it had been accepted by the publishers and I'd signed off on everything, so it was too late to change that story. And I discovered a song by a folk singer that was new to me at the time, Grace Petrie, who is an absolutely brilliant lyricist. I really love her work. And one of her songs that I was discovering was a song called No Woman Ever Wants to Be a Muse. with lines like no woman ever wants to be amused, to be cranked over hot coals, to be slandered, to be used, and the idea that songwriters write these songs about their inspiration that just tell their side of the story, and actually the other person didn't ask to have their story told. And I've just written a book about a rock star who writes songs, and it's not a massive plot spoiler, you've worked this out so far. Cindy, to some extent, becomes a muse for him. And I hadn't really focused on that side of the equation. And I felt challenged to even the score a bit and to look at songwriting from the other side. So, Imogen Imagine is the story of a young woman who has her life completely disrupted and turned upside down when her ex-boyfriend has a massive hit single with a song about their breakup that has her name in the title, which means everybody knows it's about her, and is very much his perception of things and not the way she would describe it to people. And she decides to do something about that, and the consequences of that for both of them are far more than she ever thought they would be. So that's, in essence, that's Imogen Imagine. So it's kind of a cousin to Dead Man Singing.
Can I ask, did you write the song?
I did. I'm not a songwriter.
Is it in there then, so that we can
Well,
see the...
there are. I'm really excited by this. First of all, I wrote the chorus, which was specifically referred to in the text, and then there's other isolated lines that are referred to. And then with that, I thought, well, let's try and actually put it together into a whole song. And once I got the lyric, I got in touch with a friend of mine, a brilliant local musician called Ollie Hopper-Pay, and said, could you take a look at this for me and just tell me, does this work as a lyric? And he looked at it and came back to me and said, the thing is though, Steve, it's really hard to tell until you start putting a tune to it. Would you like me to put a tune to it? And I was like, yes, please. And Ollie has done that. Ollie has written the music for Imogen Imagine, the song. And I maintain that means that Ollie and I have now written a hit single, a massive hit single. Because in the book, it's a massive hit single. So I've written a massive hit single. It may not be one in real
Well,
life.
I'm going to have to record it and put it on TikTok.
Ollie is trying to persuade me to do exactly that.
I mean, it's a little bit wag the dog, isn't it? I mean, you need to get the book off. And I think what I think for you is most exciting is if you get Imogen Imagine off the ground, which I'm sure you will, with Dead Man Singing, you've now got your genre.
Thing is, I don't want to just write
Sure,
books about music.
But I mean, from a publishing business
Yeah.
perspective, suddenly they know where to put Steve.
Well, I'll take that.
Which, rightly or wrongly, is what they do to us all.
Yes, but yeah, Ollie reckons with his contacts, music-wise, it wouldn't be that expensive for us. He wants me to do a crowdfunder to get this happening, and I may well do that, but I'm going to wait and see what agents and publishers have to say first. Hire Ollie. Ollie's a brilliant guitarist and a great musician and a good singer, but he's not the right singer for Carl, the character in the book, for Carl's voice. So we'd get a session singer in, get some good session musicians. Ollie knows a good producer, and we'd produce it as a pop song, as it would be in the story. Ollie has done a demo that's just him on acoustic guitar singing, and you've heard Ollie perform it. And that's great, but that's not the song as it would be in the book. So we may well do that, and I'd love to do that, because that would be really exciting.
And next, you're working on something new?
I am working on something new. While Imogen Imagine is out on submission, I've done the A to E to L to Z of the next book, and and I've not yet started writing. I've got a little bit more research that I need to do before I'm ready to start writing, but I'm itching to start writing. I'm really excited with the idea. It's actually taking the germ of the idea of one of the children's stories that I wrote way back when, that I always felt had something about it that needed to be done something. And for years I didn't know what to do with it. And just a couple of weeks ago, something clicked and I saw how I could reset it in a very different context. And as soon as I had that connection, loads of other ideas started falling into place, and the arc of the story, and I'm so excited about it. I'm not going to tell you what that is yet, because it's too early in the process for me. I do have a working title, which again I won't tell you, but I will say I haven't made up my mind if the working title is brilliant or absolutely dog awful. And it's nowhere in between the two. It's definitely one or the other. So
I think we need to hear that.
no, but the title makes no sense without knowing the
That's
plot.
all right.
No, I'm sorry.
Because I won't be able to tell you whether it's.
No, I'm going to. I'm sorry. I'm going to be mysterious and enigmatic, and if one of the things I mentioned earlier, that when I was at school I got bullied a lot. One of the things.
We're not going to bully you.
No. But one of the things that I now have, as a result of that, is I don't bend to peer pressure, and I'm quite happy to stand alone against the crowd. So no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to tell you.
Bad luck.
However, I'll happily come back another time and tell you later in the process if Alex wanted to invite me back again.
Oh, I think we can manage that.
Yes! Legally binding.
I have witnesses here. So I'm going to open it up, so if anybody else has any questions. Yeah.
Steve, have you got a 3-book contract with these publishers, or how's the?
No, my the Book Guild offered me a contract just for the one book,
Yeah.
and then I went back to them with Foul and Fair, and they said, "Oh yes, please." I think if I were to go back to them again with Image and Imagine, they would probably take it. But I want to see if there's a better boat for me to fish from. They've been brilliant to work with, but they've struggled to get the book into bookshops and to make bookshops aware of it. Between them and me, we've not been successful enough on the marketing side, and I think with a bigger publisher, I'm hoping that I would be more successful on that. So that's why I thought it was worth trying. And I do feel that Image and Imagine, I'm desperately proud of the other 2 books. I genuinely feel Image and Imagine is better. It's the best thing I've written. There's an emotional depth to it that is a step further than the other books. I'm not saying that they're lacking emotional depth, but it takes it further. One of my beta readers for Image and Imagine said that there was one passage that actually brought him to tears, which I was just thrilled with, because I love causing misery. But as an affirmation of the book successfully doing what I wanted it to do, that was quite a key scene. And it was a scene that I particularly wanted to know, just because I know my friend's background and some personal history he's got. I needed to know that scene was convincing for him. And yeah, his answer said, yeah, I did what I wanted to with that. So I'm hopeful of Image and Imagine, but we'll wait and see.
So it's the marketing, really, that you need the push.
People who have read my books tell me they really like them.
Yeah.
If you look at my Amazon reviews, there's some more moderate, but mostly they're very positive. Now, I know that that's because most people don't bother to put a review if they've not enjoyed it, but lots of people who don't have a reason to suck up to me, lots of people who aren't my existing friends, have told me how much they've enjoyed the book. So the books get a really good response when people discover them, but I need more people to discover them.
Yeah.
Which actually is my next question is that people often ask in the marketing guys will always ask, what does success look like? Right? And from one of your earlier comments, you talked about getting into bookshops. Now, actually, in publishing these days, publishing is not about bookshops anymore. It's about actually getting as many digital copies over the line to as many people and as many markets. Now, I think your stuff is probably a little bit British, but that's not to say people love it or not love it. But I mean, is that? I mean, I've got a friend of mine. His definition of success is going to Waterstones in some little town somewhere and signing lots of copies. I couldn't think. I mean, that would be the worst thing I could possibly imagine.
I'd be quite happy to do that.
Which is my question. What does success actually look like?
I'm gonna answer that question while dodging that question. I mentioned before that I'm a big music fan. When I was a teenager in the 1980s, there was a band that I was really into called 12th Night, who were in the 1980s there was a revival of prog rock music, and they were part of the prog rock revival. The trailblazers of the genre were Marillion, and 12th Night were one of the leading next rank bands, but not massively popular. Anyway, 12th Night, their lead singer Jeff Mann left the band, having got a bit tired of fronting a not entirely popular group, not entirely popular or commercial, and he went solo to record even less commercial and even less popular music. And then a few years after that, I came across an interview with him in a fanzine, which for younger people here, that's what we had before the internet. And in this interview, the interviewer was catching up with what he'd been doing since, and he'd gone and got ordained. He had worked as a curate in an inner city church in Manchester. He had carried on with his solo career, and he'd written and put on a play. And the interviewer said, oh yes, you put on a play, how did that go? And Jeff Mann said, oh, it was wonderful, it was such a success, it was so good, so successful. I mean, we lost loads of money, but it was a huge success. And that has always stayed with me. To some extent for me, success was the day I got the email from the Book Guild saying they wanted to publish my book. And the real success for me is writing books that I can feel proud of and that I'm pleased with and that other people enjoy. Don't get me wrong, I'd love the sales and any money or whatever that comes with that, but that's not my driving force. I'm sure my publishers would give you a different answer as to what success is, and I'm sure my wife would be very happy if my version of success went more towards the money. But yeah, for me, success is on an artistic level more so than a commercial one. Says he, while still trying to get an agent and find a bigger publisher. Sorry, Leslie, you had a...
Yeah, no, it's this social media thing. It's like, to promote your books and to use social media and so on, which I totally get, and I know there's wonderful people who lovely.
If anyone needs help with using social media to promote their books, Eleanor.
Absolutely, to do this.
Wait, Eleanor, know who you are.
I mean, I adore books and I love them and I tell everyone about them, but I struggle to put an Amazon review up. I struggle to put, I don't do social media. I hate it, but I will tell everyone. So you've got this huge range of people that buy the books on Amazon, that love them. How do you get them to promote your sales?
Something I came across a while ago, the idea that the best way of selling books is you find the champions of your book, and those are the people who have read it and then can't stop talking about it and telling their friends. And everybody who comes across your book and reads your book might be somebody who reads it and enjoys it and then doesn't do anything else. Might be somebody who reads it and doesn't enjoy it. But every now and again you'll find one who will go and tell all their friends, and some of them will go and buy it. And you can't, there's not a lot the author can do to make someone into a champion, but I know every now and again I will read something that I then want to go and say, oh, that was so good, you must read this book.
But there's no way to measure that, is there? I mean, I've read books, Patrick's, yours, and they're fantastic, and loads of my friends have read them and adore them and so on, but where's the measurement, I suppose?
The only thing I might say about that is that if you try to flog a book at someone, they'll react negatively. But actually, if you try to sort of talk about a theme, you can be very passionate about folk music, you're very passionate about football, and there are areas and groups, I particularly have had success with Facebook, where there's a whole bunch of guys out there who like war-y stuff and thematic stuff, and I basically pump all that stuff out there and try to help them because obviously I do a lot of research. But in the same way, I'm sure there must be a whole football world where you don't necessarily flog your book, but you talk about the themes, and then somehow underneath, going by the way,
and I think, as you say, nobody likes it if they feel you're trying to sell to them. So it's a question of putting yourself in those spaces in a way that is authentic and doesn't feel that you're pushing on it. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mentioned Richard Thompson before. I saw Richard Thompson in concert sometime last year. I'm actually going to see him in about a month's time, which I'm really excited about. And I've persuaded Ollie, my musician friend who we talked about, to come along too. And I'd love to see what his reaction is going to be, because Richard Thompson is the finest guitar player I've ever seen. And I can give you a very long, boring list of great guitarists I've seen. That Richard Thompson is better. I'm going off on a digression here, so I'll rein myself back in. But I saw Richard Thompson last year, and I wrote a review of the concert on my blog, and I posted a link to that blog post on a Richard Thompson Facebook group that I'm part of, which the review, as it's part of my author blog, refers to the fact that Dead Man Singing owes something to Richard Thompson. Whether anyone from that group read the review and then discovered the book, I don't know, but it opened that route for them. I did a similar thing with Delamitri, the Scottish band. They played an important part in Dead Man Singing, and I saw them towards the end of last year, and I did the same thing. And I actually had comments on the blog, or rather on the Facebook post about the blog, from members of the Delamitri fan group who had read my review. So I know that they're aware of the book, and I hope some of them will give it a punt.
I find actually, Steve, approaching, not that I have to at this point, but magazines like Hampshire Live, Dorset Live, they have a big readership, and they are really, they're quite willing to promote a local author, especially if it's something like football. I mean, even BBC, they're all news.
I did get in touch with Dorset FA, and I think the suggestion of, because the values in football terms, the values that Foul and Fair pushes are very much in line with the FA. They have a very big thing on it's about the kids enjoying. It's not all about winning, and with younger ages, it shouldn't be all about winning. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. So I was hoping they might get on board, but I think it kind of got a bit lost in the committee stage. So you push at these doors, and frustratingly, some of them are not opened.
I think sometimes you need to be a little bit creative.
One of the things I did to be creative with Foul and Fair, for the launch, I did a book tour of kids' football tournaments, which was great fun. I set up a bookstall, and nobody goes to a kids' football tournament to buy a book, but everybody who goes to the football tournament understands the world that Foul and Fair is set in. And now these tournaments, you typically have every age group from under 7 up to under 14, under 15, maybe under 16. You'll have between 10 and 16 teams in each age group. Each team will have between 8 and 10 players, and each player will have one or more adult who's come with them, and those adults are my market. So that's an awful lot of people at the tournament who might be interested, and I had no idea how it would go, and I thought it was entirely possible I would turn up and sell nothing because nobody goes to a football tournament to buy a book. But actually, I did really well at them last summer. Over the course of the summer, I sold about 100 books at those tournaments, including about 2/3 of that was Foul and Fair and 1/3 Dead Man Singing. So it was well worth doing, and I got to watch football. So win-win. Victoria.
I've constantly been told when approaching the writing of the main character that you should kind of stick to almost what you know, and you should, because you mentioned that in Imagine Imagine, the main character is a woman in this
Yes.
text. Was it difficult moving to, a woman's perspective? So I'm told you should really stick with one, but I wouldn't want to limit myself to just that.
That's a really good question, and it interests me because nobody has ever asked why I felt qualified to write a has-been rock star who fakes his death, which, plot spoiler, I've done none of those things. So any author, you make a certain creative leap in the characters you create. I think write what you know is good advice. And characters have to feel authentic. I think when we read books as readers, it is an act of empathy. We are seeking to make a connection with the character and to understand the characters that we're reading about. As an author, it's also an act of empathy to create a character. You need to get into the character's head and understand them. And while Imogen was further away from my experience than my other main characters, because I've never been a 21-year-old girl, and it's a long time since I've been a 21-year-old boy. And actually, the 21-year-old girls I knew when I was a 21-year-old boy are very different to 21-year-old girls today. It's a different society. So yes, there was a big leap to go there. And once I was far enough into the writing, there were friends who were more female than me, who I asked to read it, and one of the things I specifically asked was, does this sound like a 21-year-old woman as written by a middle-aged man? And they said no, she sounds right. She feels authentic.
The thing is, on that, if you're writing historical fiction like I do, I don't actually know anybody from the 18th century. I can say, have I got the voice right? Is it authentic?
You could hang out with Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I'd rather not.
I can understand
Please don't. So you're right. You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written male characters.
I was saying this to someone today. It's interesting. Lots of people have asked me along those lines about Imogen, and actually, in Foul and Fair, there's a secondary main character who, about a quarter of the book is from her perspective, who is the mum of a kid who plays football. Lots of people have asked me about writing a female main character. I'm not aware of female authors being asked about writing male characters. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me otherwise.
Well, I think that because there's probably more female writers than there are men. There are more female readers than there are men. So there are more books written by women for women.
Yes.
And a lot of those are romances, and the romance has to have, is it a 70-30 split? I don't know, you used to write romance back.
Yeah, but I didn't get published.
So there's a bit of a formula for a romance, capital R romance, where I've not written them myself, so I'm not entirely certain, but you have a couple of chapters from the female point of view, and then you have to have the male point of view.
Oh, okay.
So there always has to be the male, the alpha male point of view going through it.
But I think broadly, I think more than being a man or a woman, and therefore having that understanding, you need to have a certain understanding of the human condition.
Well, this
and,
exactly it, yeah.
and that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who are very nervous about writing something outside their own voice. And I think a lot of that has been driven by America, where there's lots of people who had to go with various other people because who can you be, how you pretend to be a Vietnamese girl in the 1970s when you're a...
Cultural appropriation.
Well,
Yeah.
cultural, but also gender appropriation in terms of experience. So, I'm a firm believer that actually our job as novelists is to be creative and have an imagination and to actually empathize with other people. Because otherwise, how will you ever write a great story if you're just basically talking about yourself?
I mean, I think it's fair to say David's had a much more interesting life than I have. So, yeah. And death, yeah.
This touches another point, which I don't think you necessarily covered, is that I think most of us authors, maybe not implicitly, but there's an element of yourself that comes out in all everyone's stories.
Absolutely.
I know
Yes.
us, because mine certainly do. You know, of course, I think I'm a swashbuckling aviator. Why wouldn't I? But the point is actually, there's a lot of that comes out, and it should come out, and which is why I thought it was interesting that you say that your characters are not based on reality, because the vast majority of mine are.
I think James, the main character in Foul Affair, is closer to me than Dave is. A lot of people asked me when it came out if Dead Man Singing was autobiographical, which again, now that you've heard the plot, seems a ridiculous question. There's a sense in which it's autobiographical of my record collection, but...
Although it strikes me that if your life had gone like that, actually you would have quite liked to have gone down the musician, rock star. I mean, otherwise why would you be interested?
I think, yeah, that was never going to happen in terms of talent.
That's why we've got to...
Victoria.
I was going to say also that I've also wanted to write books and like for a man as well. And how did you kind of stick to your guns? Like, did anyone ever tell you to not write it with the image and emotion?
I'm not sure that I told people what I was writing until I was far enough in that I knew I had something. And I'm... Whether it's what I was saying earlier about when I was refusing to bend to the pressure of the mob, because that is what you would mean about revealing the fourth book, I've have a tendency of being stubborn, and if I think I'm right, I can stick to my guns. And I think as long as you feel that what you're writing has value and that you can see that it's coming together and you know what you're trying to do with it, keep going. The number one person you write for is you. And if there's publishers and readers who then are interested in what you've written, that's lovely. But write for you, and don't let someone tell you what you can't do, because you can. A friend of mine was telling me today, she's now an author. She's about to publish the first book in a 6-book deal that she signed, and I've read it and it's great. Alice G. May, The Resistance Girls, a launch is going to be at the Bournemouth Writing Festival. It's a really good book, well worth reading. She was telling me that when she was at school, she really liked writing, and one of her teachers said to her, "No, you're not good enough." To be honest, any career in creative stuff, just no. And she stopped writing for years because of that. And I just think that's so awful that the teacher said that. So if you want to write something from the perspective of a man, you go for it. Don't let anyone stop you. Yeah, write what you want to write, definitely.
Well, at least, because going back to what you were saying earlier about the most important thing is get the first draft done.
Yeah.
And that's about just doing it you yourself to get it done. Don't worry about whatever everyone else might eventually say about it.
Nobody, with Image and Imagine, nobody other than me got to see a word of it until about the 5th draft. And that's probably quite normal for me. The first draft isn't about being good at all, it's just about scoping it out. Sorry, are there any more questions?
You said at the beginning that you started off when you wrote children's stories for
Yes.
your own children and none of them got published.
Absolutely.
And you've just said that the book you're writing now is based on a little nugget from one of them.
Yes.
So, would you be tempted now to write children's fiction again?
I'm not sure that I would, partly because of what I said about when I started writing adult length novels, finding it so liberating. And writing good children's fiction is hard. I mean, the thing I found difficult compared to now was I never felt I had enough room to get a really satisfying, twisty, unexpected plot. My plots, they were fun, but they were fairly linear. Whereas with the other books, there's a lot more room to manoeuvre with the adult books. I'm not averse to the idea of one day publishing or looking to publish some of the children's books. There's a couple that I wrote in what I'd hope is going to be a series that I think might stand up, and I might one day go back to them. But for the moment, I'm not going to. Again, partly because I think you don't want to confuse the market as to who Steve Couch, the author, is. If I suddenly start writing children's books, I don't think I'm established enough to get away with that. I could do, and I've thought of that, and I've even thought about what that other name would be. But
Can we vote on it?
let me think about that. No, I think if I was going to publish children's books under a pseudonym, I think I would be Harry Rich, because Harold Rich was my grandfather, who was the loveliest man that ever lived. He was just wonderful, wonderful man, and yeah, that if I had to come up with a different name, that one that feels like it would have some weight to it. No, that's my father's father was nominated for 2 Oscars as an art director. This is my mum's dad, Harold, or as I would be, Harry Rich, because I think Harry Rich sounds more like a children's author than Harold. But yeah, I might one day with children's books, but it's on the back burner. I've got so many ideas that I want to write for novels for people like us. So.
Can I ask a question, Steve?
Yes.
Yeah, now, love the plot of Dead Man Singing.
You have
all,
excellent taste.
All the things that come out of it, the music and, you know, the coming back to life and all of that. You know, I have always wanted to write a book, and unlike you, I didn't get criticised at school, because in fact, one of my teachers, my English teacher, stood in front of the class and read one of my stories out, and that was just like the best moment of my life. But in today's world, criticism, critique, all of that, that is what holds me back. So if we can delve a bit deeper into that, I would really appreciate it.
I think this goes back to what I was saying about writing groups. I'm very happy to let other people read my work and give me a critique, and I'm very, very choosy in who I ask to do it. When I was writing children's stories, when I was working for the educational charity, a number of my colleagues were writers as well, in the same way that I was, not necessarily fiction, but they were skilled with words and with writing. And I would often share my stories with them and get them to tell me what they thought. And there was an understanding that I didn't want them just to be, oh, it's really good, Steve. I wanted them to tell me what was wrong with it, and they knew that that was okay. But I would only give it to someone who I was willing to listen to what they had to say. I had one colleague who a few times asked if he could read my stories. I never gave them to him because we disagreed about so many things about writing. I knew that any comment he gave me, I'd just think, oh yeah, that was rich. And it would be of no value to me because I didn't respect where it was coming from. So criticism is good, and we had a working environment where we were used to critiquing what other people had written, with the understanding was this isn't personal, this is us working together to make this bit of work as good as it could be. And that, I think, that's a really helpful mindset. But do it in a place of trust and with people who when, sorry, Patrick, when people do come back with criticism, sometimes they give you criticism and you think, yeah, you're right, that's not it. Sometimes your instincts say, no, you've got that wrong, I do. And I'd force myself to live with the criticism for a bit. And sometimes I'd still think, no, they've got that wrong. And sometimes you'd come to see that they were right. And normally it'd be somewhere between the two. So yeah, criticism is good, but from the right sources. Any more? Oh, Victoria?
You said you're selective about who you let read your book
Yes.
when you want criticism. How do you kind of get over the hurdle of being vulnerable enough to give your work to them? Because it's quite a wonderful thing to do.
It is. I'm lucky in that I was in a work environment where that was part of what we did, and I had good friends there that I trusted. A lot of people find writers' groups really help with that. I've said why I didn't join one. That isn't a whatever you don't do that. I just never felt it was a place I would feel safe to do that in. I would say someone that you trust and who you trust enough to say, I'm looking for a critical friend, I'm not looking for someone who's just going to give me a little ego massage, and make sure they know what you want from them, and that really is what you want from them. Because the bottom line is, to be a writer you need to develop a thick skin to deal with that kind of criticism, and it's such a valuable part of the learning process and the journey. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
How are we doing for time?
We've overrun. We're very fine. There were so many questions, I wasn't going to stop.
Are there any more? I'm happy to keep overrunning it.
You mentioned about like you're keen to include cultural reference
Yes.
in your story. Do you do that in a way where you, like in the future, in decades to come, you intend it to be like a time capsule of what was relevant, or do you kind of trust that they endure?
That's a good question, Daisy. It's a good question, one that I hadn't really thought about. I think with Dead Man Singing, it is set in 1990. One of the reasons for that being, if you tried setting that story in the present day, then the whole Faking the Death wouldn't result in any financial gain, because everybody just goes on Spotify and the artist makes nothing. So that put the time of Dave's heyday in the 1970s, and actually I was 22 in 1990, so it's a time when I was really into music, so it was lots of music that I loved, and I love 70s music as well, so that was lots of music that I loved. So it was a bit of an indulgence for me. But I felt the challenge was to write it in such a way that if someone knows none of those songs at all, whether that's someone now or someone in 20 years' time, the story will stand up. And you can't quote lyrics of songs in a book, so I was having to describe the songs where what's said in the song is important, but I tried to make sure that everything the reader needs is in the book. Does that answer the question? I feel like I've answered a question that was adjacent to your question, but is that cool?
Well, thank you so much for all the questions and for Steve being my guest. So, Steve is going to be around a little bit
Absolutely.
to sign books if anybody would like to come and get a copy.
And if you haven't brought your books along, I will happily sell you copies.
He has them still, he's the marketing. So, thank you very much, Steve.
One thing I didn't mention,
One thing I wanted to mention, which we should have mentioned earlier, and we forgot, sorry. A friend of ours, Sophie Beale, who those of you who are involved in the Book With Writing Festival will know, She and I are in the process of starting up a podcast called called Beneath the Page, and we are interviewing. Yes, we're interviewing a number of esteemed local authors. We're not ready to start publishing them yet. We want to get a few recorded and then start getting them out regularly. The idea is it's a podcast about books and about the writers behind the books. And as I said earlier, I think that authors can't help but let their worldview come out in their books, and what they believe and what they think about life comes out in the books. And we want to explore that a little bit, as well as just talking about books, because the fact you're here, I suspect you love talking about books too. So we've got a little bookmark. You're very welcome to take it. There's a QR code on it, which if you scan it will take you to a page which hopefully has now been set up so that you can sign up to go on the mailing list. If not, it will take you to a page that one day will do that. But yeah, the page exists. I don't know if the capability does yet. So please grab one of those bookmarks. I've also got my bookmarks that tell you all about how wonderful my books are. So please take one of those as well while you're buying one or more of my books. But do look out for the podcast. We're really excited about it. Kate is coming on. We've got Alex coming on. Alice May, who I mentioned earlier, we recorded her podcast today, and we were really pleased how it went. And in actual fact, we're also doing one. We're going to record one where Sophie interviews me, because her original idea was for her to do the podcast, and she phoned me up and asked if I would do it. And by the end of the phone call, I'd persuaded her that I'd be a better co-host than a guest. So I've crowbarred myself into it, which I'm rather smug about. Yes. So yeah, Beneath the Page.
Excellent. Can't wait for this. So just a couple of announcements before we wrap up really quickly. We do have a author events newsletter. If you haven't signed up already, the form is up here at the front. Please do, and you will find out about all the local events that we've got. There's a couple of signboards around that have got a list of some of the future events that we've got coming up. We are here on the last Tuesday of every month. My guest next month will be Paula Harmon. I've just changed her name, I'm so sorry. As soon as I said it, I thought that's not right. She's not here, she didn't hear that.
Yeah, strangely that bit's going to get deleted.
Yeah, so she will be here on the 29th of